I signed up for a quantitative real estate class, and I was learning some stuff about GIS and real estate and some data sets. And this is my final project. The U.S. Census publishes permit data. Every metropolitan area, they approve permits, so you like and I want to see trends, and all these files are available for free. It goes back to 2004. It started off as text data, but more recently they're Excel files. Um, there's some upcoming changes to the files. They're going to start including more data. So my database schemas are going to be changing soon. Essentially, just in a fit of inspiration, I just wrote up a bunch of procedural code the other night, and I got it working. Okay, great. Let me make this into objects and get it, because eventually I'd like to drop this into an Airflow system, which will just run it every month. And in order to do that, I think I'm going to need some classes. I've mostly done, it's an ETL job. I think I've done a decent job of making the extract and the load object oriented, but the transform is where I'm having yeah, I just want to make good decisions early on.
Mhm.
Should I make a abstract base class? Should I make a transformer to handle text files? Should I make a transformer to handle Excel files? Should I make a factory? And don't want to say I'm overwhelmed. Just maybe there's a lot of choices, and I want to get it
Well, I
right
think
the
it would
first
be
time.
fine if you are. That's often how I feel like when I'm in a big project. It's almost like a good sign because it means you're pushing your boundaries and expanding your capabilities.
Right?
If you feel overwhelmed in a code base, or at least that's the way it works with me. I feel overwhelmed with code a lot for what that's worth.
Right.
But I understand. Yeah, I do understand what you're getting at. So this is really nice how you've organized it into literally files about extracting, loading, and transforming. I like that. Now let's see here. So it sounds like there's one of the things is you like to do is make your code more object oriented, and
Hmm.
then and also that kind of fits under a broader umbrella of let's make our code organized in a better way just to have higher quality code and for all the benefits that come from that, right? Uh,
Yes.
so let's see. So do you think which of these three files, or maybe another file in this repo,
Hmm.
do you think is the one that needs the most love first?
Probably the transform section. That's the only one I've left as procedural code.
Okay. Oh, good. Okay. So let me organize that window a little bit. Okay. All right. So just make it a little bit bigger. Okay. So all right, so let me just skim through this. So let's see here. First thing I'm noticing is that whenever I have a group of functions, and I think it's totally fine, by the way, to make a program first based entirely on functions. If that's just because sometimes it's either because of how you think or the nature of the problem and your current understanding of the problem. That's just the way that's most expedient. And once a program's running, the operating system doesn't care whether you implemented that program using functions or using classes, right? The data that is being operated on doesn't care either, right? It's all going to go into a sequence of ones and zeros that are symbolizing machine code instructions, right? And so, really, whether we organize as functions or classes is more about for us as the developers. And I think that very often, I've certainly have had plenty of scenarios where I started writing the program based in terms of functions and then converted to classes, even recently. And because really, I think of it as like I'm not trying to get the code. I see the process of creating the code base as a process, right? I'm going to make it some functionality work, then I'm going to improve the code while making sure it continues to work, and then I'm going to repeat that. So the first thing I'm looking at, so these first two functions I see here, what I'm noticing is that they both take a file year and they both take a file month, and they literally have the same signature even. Okay. And same for this next one, for this next one here, except this takes another argument called data file, right? And then let's see what else we got. We got get sheet name, and then process Excel file has year, month, and data file again. So actually, every single one of these functions takes these two arguments, and some of them take these two arguments plus a third argument. That screams turn all these functions into methods of one class. Okay, assuming something, assuming that you call these functions on the same file year, like you don't call this function on a file year on one file year, and the second one is then called on a different file year. Okay, if that's the case, then we don't want to. We will not necessarily benefit from combining them into methods of a single class. But I'm going to assume that in your code base you have a file year, and then you call this function on it, and then you call this function using that with the same file. Is that the case here?
Right. The census files, I guess they've evolved over the years. So like basically, I'm feeding it to these functions just to get a sense of like what the format is. Sometimes like some years they added an extra column, so I need to like for get numeric column count.
Mm-hmm.
For a set of years, there's 6 numeric columns, but then starting at some point there's 7. And then
Mm-hmm.
its CBSA file, like they include a CBSA data point starting at some point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And mostly those are just determining like what kind of file I'm working with exactly.
Okay. Rich, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, hi everybody. Yeah, quick question.
Hey, Rich.
Is where do you get, I think it's important to, one of the questions that I have that would change the way I would think about what I think is Aaron's next step is what's the source of the year and the month? Is it the file itself? Is it the date of the file, or is it extracted from the file name? You know, where is that data coming from?
Oh, I see. I if you go to the website, it starts off in the year 2004, and then there's a month. So basically, I just in my extract code, I said let's start on this date, and then I generate like a list of month date combos from 2004 to present, and then I systematically just
Oh, okay.
generate the URL, and the URL has the month and year, and I just download them, and that you can see that in the extract.
Got it.
So there's a different file for each month and year combo. Is that correct?
Yes, and you
Or
can see
different
exactly.
URL rather, right, that you pull it from. Okay,
Exactly.
gotcha. Okay. Okay, that clarifies things. Okay, so what I would do in this transform module is I would make a class name that represents basically the data that is extracted from the URL for a given month and year. Okay, so that's what I would start doing. And the question is, and remind me, you said it, but I guess I need a reminder. What's the nature of the data for this given month and year at this URL exactly?
Sure. And you can actually see the data in the data directory up there, and then there's a raw data raw, and then a bunch of files.
Okay.
And these are downloaded straight from the website. Basically, there's just different cities in the country, metropolitan areas, and when if you're a builder and you want to build a shopping mall or a housing complex, you need to get a permit, and this will tell you like total 1 unit. So like in Abilene, Texas, in the year 2004, they issued 20 permits for 1 unit, and just down the line. You can.
What I might do is call this housing unit data set. And there might be a better name. And I find that often when I'm doing this kind of thing that we're doing now, which is transforming a group of functions into a class, then let's see. I'm not sure the way it's showing on your screen share. Nothing's overlapping now, right, guys?
It looks good.
Okay.
Looks
So
good.
the way usually sometimes I'm not sure what to name it at first. So I just pick a name and I don't sweat too much about it because you can always change it later, right? But what I'm going to do is give it a constructor. We could make this a data class, but I'll just make it like a regular class. And then what I would do is I would literally go through, and here I'm copy pasting, but obviously you just modify. What I do is step one, indent, okay, function the method, right? Then I say self, and I remove these two arguments that I already stashed on self in the constructor. Okay. And then step three is to go through and convert them all. Like that. Boom. Now this is a method.
I can't help myself. I can't help myself.
Hold on just a second. So Alfonso, how does this look so far? Did you follow that okay, or you have anything that came up in your mind about it? Oh, you're muted. I cannot hear you.
That does make sense. I guess maybe I'm gonna muddy the waters a little bit, but I was thinking of like maybe I need to make an abstract base class to handle the Excel files, and then one to handle the text files, and then I'm sorry, an abstract base class as a transformer, and then implement specific instances of that abstract base class to handle the different types of file types. But
You can,
maybe I'm
and I would
distracting.
put that off. That to me, that's like getting a little too far ahead. What I
Okay.
would do is like I would say, okay, let me just make this one class first, and then refactor the whole code base to use this class so that it works,
Uh-huh.
right? And then I would say, and then what you just said about factoring out some kind of abstract base class, that may be a good next step.
Okay, fair enough.
Or
I
it may
think
be the next step, 3 steps ahead is the best way to take it, right? Or it may be that you don't need to do that at all, right? Maybe you could just have a non-abstract base class that holds, what you need. So, and so
okay.
you may say like the way we may say housing unit extractor may be a better name, for example. What do you think?
Yeah. Or probably transformer since it's in the
Or
transform.
transform? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Excuse me. Transformer.
Okay.
Okay. And Rich, what were you gonna
I was going to
say?
suggest a lot of these functions take the year and month and convert them to a data object in the first of the month.
Mhm.
So I was going to suggest just doing that in the constructor as well, and then you don't have to recompute it every time.
I'll tell you the way I would do it. I would
Oh,
say I would either make a
Wow.
method or a property, maybe. Oops, excuse me. Like so. That's a good catch. I didn't even notice that. So that's another thing that can happen as an opportunity that you'll notice, right? Because what he said is right. Like, so let's convert this. What's another one that does? Yeah, this also uses that first of the month thing. So let's copy this function in. Indent, self, and here we convert the references to the member variables by just replacing them with this reference here, which of course references self dot, right? And then so that's like, and that can be done in 2 steps. Like it could be like step one is convert all the methods, and that'll be a commit, right?
mhm.
And obviously it helps a lot if you have some unit tests to let you know that everything works. And then when you do, as you're doing this, step two, the second commit could be I noticed this pattern. My colleague Rich pointed out that I'm, using this date first of the month thing. Let me factor that out as a method, right? And that could be like literally a second commit in your branch if you're working in a branch for this. You may not be because you're, you're solo working on this repository, it sounds like, and that's fine. But basically that would be a separate step. And often I say, okay, these are the steps in which I'm evolving the code base, and I'm going to kind of package. I'm going to make a lot of commits, basically, or at least I'm not going to make too few commits. I'm going to make my each commit is one thing as much as possible without stressing about it too much. Like if the commit message is do this and do this, that means I probably should have done it as two separate commits, but be very flexible on that because a lot of times it's just not workable or convenient. So that is like a general directional rule. Okay. So before I move forward, Alfonso, any comments or questions about what we've done so far here?
No, this is pretty straightforward. Good advice. Thanks.
And also what I'm relying on you, Alfonso, is to course correct me if I do something that's not appropriate for what you need, because I don't understand this problem space. I don't understand your code base as much as you do, obviously. So if I do something that's like you see a problem with, please speak up so that we can make, because that'll be a learning opportunity. And also I need to, tell you how you can do it so you can actually, apply it to the problem. So,
Right, sure thing.
because, what I'm doing so far is just almost like a general algorithm, right? That I'm following here. Anybody else have any comments or questions about this so far? Okay, so let's continue. And maybe what I will ambitiously do let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So what I'm going to do is convert each one. That should be easy. Okay. Now, also this is good. Now we have a new argument, self comma data file. Okay. Now, obviously, the other thing that I'm not showing here is you need to go through the code base. Everything that calls the function called is CBSA file. You have to convert it to a method of, which means that code block, whatever the scope is that's calling this, the function of this name, now has to be converted to something that has access to an instance of housing unit transformer. And then also we'll have the, and then we'll be able to call this method instead. Okay.
Okay.
So that's the, thing that I'm not going to go into, but yeah. Okay. So, or maybe I'll go into it later. But so you have this method is CBSA file. It's referencing, wait a second. I skipped over one, didn't I? Yeah, okay, I did. I converted this, but I did not yet. Oh, I did actually. I partially converted this.
Oh, right. Yeah, first of the month there. Okay.
And that would have still worked. It's just leaving a little bit. Oh, I know why, because it referenced it twice. That's why I corrected one of them. Okay, but anyway, we're going to process text file, which remember the method or the original function had this third extra argument, right? Data file here. And then, so now what we're doing is file date. So here we go. Now we have a new function here, right? So I'm not gonna, that's not, we're not creating the date. So I'm just gonna convert these for file month and file year, right? And then let's see here. File underscore, I'm just gonna, actually what I'm gonna do, I'm going to just search and replace. Okay, and then similar for file month. Now, your IDE may have some function where it'll refactor this and more automatically. I'm just demonstrating the way that will always work. So no matter what editor anyone is using. Okay, excuse me, I'm just rearranging my own windows here. Okay, so what we want to do now that might be all we need to do for this one. Okay, so what we've done is we've convert this. So first of all, we indented it because Python's block structure is dictated by indentation. And then we removed the file underscore year and file underscore month arguments and changed the body of the method to operate on self.file month and self.file year. Okay. Now we also have the opportunity here to replace, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to, or in this commit, right? We could do it just, we can do multiple commits with multiple passes. Like what might be a good thing to do is have one commit where I do this conversion for the basic conversion for every method. And when I say basic conversion, I mean indent it, remove the remove file year and file month, and convert those in the body to self. And that's all I do. But I do it for all the methods, and that's one commit in version control, right?
Okay.
Does that make sense? And then
Yes.
you run tests if you have tests. This helps a lot. It helps a lot in this situation if you have good unit test coverage. This is why I really encourage you all to write tests as you go along. Either write them first using test-driven development if possible, or if that's not viable or you're not able to do that, then at least write the tests as soon as possible afterwards. Because now, do you all see how having good unit tests would be really freaking useful here? Right? Because imagine that I missed this, right? I didn't convert every reference to file underscore year to self.file underscore year. That's a bug. That's a landmine in my code. And if I have good unit tests, they will alert me to that before I even make the commit, right?
Right.
That's the value here. So now something else to point out, notice that I didn't modify anything with data file because it's just a parameter that's passed in. So when I reference that in your, here, we don't need to do anything, right? It's already working. We don't need to change it to self dot or anything, okay? Now, if we wanted to, because I noticed that there's another method here. Let's do this here. Oops. Let's skip ahead to this method, process XLS data. Now, what we might want to do, oops, sorry. Okay, what we might want to do, well, let's go ahead and convert this first, right? So I'll do a search and replace. Yes, 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 no. Let's see here. Oh, is this modifying state? So this is
I'm sorry. That last one for data file, that should probably be the main file
Oh,
for that.
okay.
The
Well, let me
side
just cut it
class.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it
Okay.
was a copy pasting error on my part, right? So it's down. Yeah, sorry.
I should have
this
I
is at
didn't
the top level.
explicitly. Yeah, I should have
Okay.
explicitly named it main and then ran it with the if name equals main. I just kind of got
Yeah, come
lazy. It
on.
was
What are you
late.
doing? I thought I taught you this. No, I'm
Yeah,
just
my mistake.
giving
It
you a hard
was
time.
late at
No,
night.
no, it's fine. It's fine. It's
Right.
fine. So okay. So anyway, yeah. So it's good. So we don't have to deal with that, right? But
Okay.
it's just one thing we want to be careful of, right? Okay. So if I did this correctly, then I said, let's see here. Let's go ahead and replace this with. Okay, so now I have these two methods, process XLS file, and also have process text file, okay? Now, one question we might have is, do we want, one thing that's possible to imagine is we take data file and we actually make it on self in the constructor. We can imagine doing that, right? So here's my question to the group, okay? Should we do this, yes or no? So who says yes and who says no? Let me see in the comments. Write yes if you think it's a good idea to do this, or write no if you think it's not in the comments. So to be clear, what I'm talking about is we say that we're actually putting on self the argument data file in the constructor. Who says yes, we should do that? And who says no? I'm going to wait until I get a few more answers. Okay, good. We got votes from several. Okay, good. Votes are coming in. All right. So I say no. Okay. And here's why. The reason I say no is because we're processing a text file here, and we're processing a different file here. Remember the rule that when you're converting groups of functions into methods of a class is that you do that when the argument is the same thing, right? That means that we call this we have this object we call data file, and we call this method function on that data file, and then later we call this a different function on the exact same data file. Okay. If one of these is a text file and the other is an Excel file, are we going to call that's not going to be the same object, right? So it depends. I mean, there may be something about the situation I'm not considering, but based on what I can see so far from this quick glance at the code base, that's what I would say. I would say I would not do this because it's likely that otherwise you're going to have some code that operates on a text file, or it operates on a Excel file, and you may have to create two instances of your class called housing unit transformer in order to operate on both of those. Does that make sense? Now, what if you have like, well, I'm only going to use one at a time. I'm going to use it on text files, or I'm going to use it in Excel files, but never in the same time. Well, the problem then is that creates ambiguity in what the argument means, right? You could make the code work that way, but then you have this thing and you don't know if it's a text file or a Excel file until you look up the line in which you invoked it, right? And that may be difficult to do with certainty at runtime. So, or to understand when you're just analyzing and thinking about the code. So, does that make sense? So, Alfonso, is that why I saw you voted no? Is that why you voted no, or did you vote no for a different reason?
Right. I voted no because yeah, you would have to like put some logic, like see like what's the file extension or something on there. But I'm running it through I'm running it through probably several hundred files, and I would probably have to like make a new instance for every single file I process, and I was hoping to just like make one instance and then just feed it a bunch of different files.
One thing you could do is make some, and maybe you did this in one of the other, I'm not sure if you did, but you can make some class called data file and then self def, oversimplifying tremendously here, but
Oh yeah, I made a SQL Alchemy file and a Marshmallow file. Maybe.
well, hold on, let me see where I'm let me finish what I'm writing here.
Okay.
This is one way to do it. And then basically you have some logic here that's unique to the type of file it is.
Mhm.
All right. And you could even put in the something like that, right? A better one would not just look at the path name, but actually like poke into the file and verify it is a text file, not just relying on the name. But then you could say super, right? And do something similar. Something like that, right? That's just protective defensive code. That's just defensive coding. Okay.
I see.
But anyway, yeah. And then what you would do is you'd say this method, what you could do potentially is you could whenever you load a file, you load it as an instance of one of these two, or you can add others, right? And then imagine that you had a list of instances of these subclasses of data file, these concrete subclasses. And
Uh-huh.
then what you did is you took this process text file and this process XLX file, and what you did is it looks to me like, well, maybe they have some things in common, but basically imagine that you put everything that's unique about this method, you put it in this method. You with me?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And everything that's unique to processing a text file, which could be literally every line of code in here,
Hmm.
right? You could say, like, actually, what you could do is say, literally put 100% of the lines of code in this method in there. Then what you'd have is a general. And then maybe you have to pass in some arguments to it.
Hmm.
Like, maybe it needs to know the file year, right? And month. So that would be, which I think they do need to do that, right? Well, actually, yeah, we're potentially the first of the month. So this is a little interesting because one thing in the way of doing this is that it's using, some items on self and even some methods. If we replace this with the first of the month, right? Self dot first of the month. And so what you could do is let's see here, is it just using? No, it's just using, let's see here. See how it's using it. Oh, I see what you're doing. Okay. Yeah, it's a little bit intertwined in here. And so what you might want to do then, once again, I converted it to one. One option is to go ahead and extract it, but go ahead and just leave this manually in there. There may be a better way to do it, but that would be something you could do if you wanted, if it's beneficial, and that's probably what I would try to do. I'd probably try to make it work based on what I'm seeing so far.
Okay.
Then it would have basically put these two methods. Well, this uses get sheet name, doesn't it? But that should probably.
Yeah, that one corresponds with the XLS file. That's like a helper for the XLS.
Gotcha. Well, you can make that a method of this.
Ah.
The issue is that yeah, I wish it was, yeah, it's a little bit too intertwined to do this really cleanly, which is very normal, right? Real code is intertwined, right?
Mhm.
So um, there's, I think I would try, let me ask, do you think you may have, right now you have a text data file source and Excel data file source. You think you may have other sources as well in the future, potentially?
Um, no, the text data file was
Mm-hmm.
lasted like 15 years, and then the Excel file is like on its fifth year at this point, I believe.
Okay. So
Maybe.
there is not, okay. Well, okay. So there may or may not actually be worth doing in this case, but often it is worth doing it. So this is just another way to potentially separate things.
Okay.
So okay, so let me just pause here. So let me catch up with comments actually. Before I do that, do you have any other comments or questions about what we've done at this stage, Alfonso?
No, no, this makes sense. I think I would have done a lot of similar things, but the you did point out some I wasn't aware of.
Good. Let me just catch up in comments. Let's see. So Jim says, would you create an abstract base class containing data file and then reference it in the children? I think, yeah, you're talking about what I was just doing, kind of, right? You could create a fact that return the correct class based on the file and so. Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, you could have a factory that would, make a factory that would dispatch to this, whichever version. That's a good point. Children. Jim, I think what you're talking about is kind of what I was doing here. Let me know if you meant something else. Okay, so what else do we want to talk about, Alfonso? What else do we want to look at in this code base? Is there another part you want to look at too?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about writing unit tests for it, and
Yeah.
I really wanted to. It just this a lot of the code is 100% dependent on just making those downloading the files that they exist. So there's it's making requests for well, it's not an API. I'm just downloading files from an external
It's getting
server.
them over the network somehow, right?
Yes, and then all this load and all the transform code depends on a file existing. So I was thinking, should I write a test with like a dummy file and of all the different possibilities? Should I mock things? I just wasn't sure how to do it because of all the dependencies.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like there's a couple of phases. One phase is it retrieves over the network somehow a file, and then it
Yes.
saves that file locally on the file system, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's good. What I would do is so what you could do if you wanted for that phase, you could write some tests, and mocks would be a good way to do that, or you could have an integration test that actually operates over the network. And though that kind of test can be, problem with that is networks can go down, your connection can be flaky. So then you have an intermittent test basically. But really the thrust of your question is, once you have a file in the local file system, the program is designed to read that file. Can you actually design a unit test that will load a test file and operate on that? Yes, I think that's a great way to do it in this scenario. I do that very often.
Okay.
Kind of a point of detail, is that technically considered a unit test? If you're being really technically strict about it, no, because remember the difference between a unit test versus an integration test is that a unit test operate or test a specific component in isolation, whereas an integration test is evaluating the interaction between two different layers, components, or subsystems. And in that viewpoint, strictly speaking, the file system is a separate system from the process in memory. So if you read a file from the file system, that technically is a integration test and not a
Uh-huh.
unit test. However, me and many, many other people kind of roll our eyes about being that strict about it, because it's often useful to construct. It's close enough to a unit test in spirit that it's a I would call it a unit test in practice. Okay, and
Okay.
actually, the way I would do it is on the file system. I would have so you have source, and maybe I have a test folder. Okay,
Okay.
and then the test folder. So actually, let me write up so the way the file system would work, you have source, then you have tests, and then what I like to do is I like to have a folder called test data. Actually, not just data, but maybe you can call it whatever you want. The convention I like is test data because it's really clear what even if I see that in isolation.
Okay.
And then what I may do is I have test data, and let's look at the kind of stuff you have stashed on data here. And you can literally, so you're downloading the raw data, right?
Right.
And what transforms it from raw to clean? Is this basically what your
Oh,
program is doing?
exactly. Yeah. So the raw data are some like the text files are terrible. I mean, like they're just so I get the text files mostly, and I
Yeah.
turn them into CSVs. And then the Excel files, that's really simple. I just like find the exact, coordinate, the exact cell where the data starts, and
Mhm.
then the exact cell like where it ends, and I just copy paste it. So that's really nice. But the all the acrobatics is done with the text file. So I take those raw files and I convert them to CSVs, and I write a bunch of inserts to insert my CSVs into my database.
Gotcha. Well, one thing we could do is we could say like raw a dot text. Is it literally a text file, right? And
Yes.
then the cleaned is a CSV. Is that true?
Yeah, I clean everything up into a CSV with common columns and data types, and so the insert's real clean.
Gotcha. So what I would have in my test data folder, did I do test data twice? Excuse me. In my test data folder, I would give them a label. This label is just A. You
Hmm.
can, I certainly encourage you to give it a more descriptive label with more characters. But honestly, I often just do this because I don't want to, waste time thinking up of a clever name.
Sure.
But notice the correspondence here. The thing is, you have, or maybe a better way to do it is it doesn't matter. Whatever naming convention you want, just be consistent so you know what it is and you never get mixed up. But the idea is I have some process in my code or some pathway of code execution that takes this and transforms to this. And I'm going
Right.
to assert that works. Okay. So the way this would work in my actually, okay. So I might say if I'm doing this in unit test, and and I might create a different method for each one, or I might have one test method that does a bunch of them. There's no wrong way to just whatever works best. What I'm going to do is here's a trick I use, and I'm going to import OS, or you can use pathlib, but I maybe out of habit, I still use OS a lot. And so what I do is I say, now there's a magic. Let's say that in this, I have this test folder, I have test, I'll call it demo.py because that's what I've named it. Okay. So I have
Okay.
this file, it's in the test folder. Also, its sibling in that folder is this test data directory, right?
Hmm.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say data dir equals os path dot base name. Let me explain this. This file is not done yet, but what I've so far, there's a magic method or magic variable, excuse me, called dunder file that is defined in every single Python file in an executing program. So it'd be something like, path to test demo.py. Okay. Now, what does base name do? Base name will give you, if you have a full path to a file, it'll give you just the directory. I'm sorry, that's wrong. Dir name is what I want to do. Dir name does that. Okay. Base name will give you well, it doesn't matter. Let's not go into that. So basically, I go say os path.dir name, path to the current file, which gives me the directory, right? That's what this is.
Oh, okay.
Okay. But I'm not done yet because I'm going to say os.path.join and then comma test data. All right. So what this will evaluate to,
Okay, cool. I see
see where I'm
what's
going with
going on.
this?
Yeah, that's
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I can make a utility method. Um, and then, okay, so I could say, let's say I'm saying from my app clean import clean file. All right. Okay, let's just say that you have a function called clean file that will take a text file and transform into a clean CSV. That's not what you named it, of course, but let's just pretend.
uh,
Okay, so what I'm going to do is say, okay, I'm going to, um, and then let's say this one will, um, how do I want to organize this? Because there's like there's loading the file, there's reading the contents of the file in the file system, there's calculating the correct new value, and then there's writing it on the file system. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to assume that this returns a string. So clean file takes a file name,
Hmm.
which would be the path to the source file, the raw data, and returns a string. And then let me just proceed on that basis. So I say, what I'll do is I'll say expected equals actually with open So what I've done here is I've slurped in the expected output value. Okay. What it should be if it's working correctly. And then I'm saying actual equals clean file self.data file raw.text. Okay. So I now have two strings in my method at this point in my method, the expected value, the contents of the expected output file, and the
Uh-huh.
actual. Okay. And then I can say self assert equal expected actual. Boom. That's
Great.
it. Okay. Now, this, like I made an assumption that may not be true, which is, you may have clean file. Imagine clean file takes two arguments, the input file to read from and the output file to write to. That might be something you do. In that case, what you want to do is make a temporary directory to write to. And then you can say, the way I would do that. Well, actually, before I go into that, any questions about what I've got so far?
No, I
Comments
think
that
this is
clear?
making
Anybody
sense.
else have any questions about this? Let me check in the chat again. Yeah, so yeah, read what Rich wrote, Alfonso. That's a good point. Thanks, Rich. Just dropped a suggestion and then had to go. But thanks, Rich. Okay, so let's say that's not the behavior of this clean file function. The function you have that you want to work with takes one argument, which is the path of the file to read from, and the second argument is the path of a file to write to. Okay, and so what you do then is I would then use a fixture. And I would say use the temp file module. Now, now the temp file module has a function called makeDtemp. This creates a directory on the file system that is unique, that is done in a way that is relatively secure, that is secure, pretty secure, definitely. Because if you do it in a naive way, there's all sorts of things that can go wrong. You could do it in a way that would actually accidentally collide with something on the file system or that already exists, or you do it in a way that some hostile process that has infiltrated that particular machine could read in there, and you don't want that. So, where a lot of situations it might be overkill, but this is the way you just do it by default, unless you have a reason to do otherwise, because
Okay.
it handles all those edge cases that we forget to think about, right? So now this is
Oh, that makes sense. Is that's why the directory has like this really random string of characters? That makes sense
that's
now.
why.
What you're saying.
You got it.
Okay.
Right on. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's for many reasons. Yeah. So
Okay.
basically all the things that can go wrong, it's kind of like we use this function instead of rolling our own for the same reason that we use a cryptography library instead of implementing our own cryptography. There's just so many, it's there. Anybody who's tried to do it has kind of gotten burnt almost to the
Okay.
first approximation. So it's a little less dire than the situation with rolling your own cryptography algorithm, but you get the idea. Okay,
Yes.
so now we have what we can do. Let's say dest equals os.path.join. This is where we're going to write to, right? And we're going to say in the let's see, self dot scratch dir. Okay. And then let's see. Yeah, probably this is what we're going to do, actually. I guess I'm sorry, I made a mistake. This wouldn't actually have. Well, okay, it depends on what you're doing, actually. Well, yeah, no, it would. It would. Hold on. Let me I was just saying call it output.csv. Okay. A.output.csv. Okay, so yeah, so this is the file we're going to write to. Okay. So now we're saying clean underscore file takes two arguments, which is the what do I call it? Oh yeah, a raw.text. I might have had that incorrect before. I'm not sure if I edited it. And then we have dest. Okay. So now the two arguments to clean file, it does not return anything. It operates by side effects. It reads in this file and writes the cleaned output to this location, which is here in your temporary directory. Follow that?
Yes.
Okay. Then we need to read it in. Right? We just wrote a file in dest, and now we need to read in what we wrote.
Okay.
Makes sense? Because like now we're doing more steps, right? Because this version of clean file, it doesn't, there's not, we can't, it doesn't, we don't know what it's actually doing directly. It's not returning the clean data, it's writing it to this file. Okay, so we give it a safe space to do that, right? And then we say, okay, go ahead and write your output there in that file, in this file, which is in this directory. Then that finishes, and then we read it in. We say, okay, whatever it wrote. So that it had this function clean file, this version of clean file has a side effect. Its side effect is to write onto the file system.
Right.
Right? Okay, that's the side effect. Okay, so that means we cannot check directly. When we have a function that has no side effects and it's just deterministically returning some value and we can assert what that value is, that's a very easy, straightforward unit test to write. But a lot of real code we need to write tests for operates by side effects, which means we need to dance more in order to get what we need in order to check that it's working correctly, right? In this case, we had to get the fixture. We had to, meaning create the directory that it could write in. We needed to tell it what file exactly to write data to. Then we start the process. It runs the system under test, i.e. the function called clean file, executes, and it finishes. So we go to the next line. I'm like, okay, well, that system we're testing, i.e. the function called clean file, is now finished. So let's measure the change of state on our system, i.e. what this read in the contents of this file, so that we can check it. Right.
Okay,
so now this is useful. Now, what happens if it does not even write a file here? Well, then our test fails because this line will fail. Right. Let's say there's no file here in dest, so I cannot open it. Okay. So that's good. Our test method will fail. And it tells us exactly what went wrong. Right. Okay. So if it progresses to the next line, it'll read in if this line succeeds, this one will succeed almost certainly. But at the end, it's just like we had before. We have two strings called expected and actual, and I chose those names to help us be really clear on what is what.
Great.
Right? So, because I want to basically write my code in a way that it minimizes my cognitive cost in fully and accurately understanding what even is going on. Okay. That way that's why I can code so much longer than a normal human, because I've gotten really good at that. So it's like running more efficiently, right? If you're like tense and you're flailing your arms and legs every which way, you can run a certain distance. But if you have great biomechanics and everything's like smooth, and you can run much, much faster without tiring yourself out. It's kind of what I'm doing here, cognitively equivalent to that. Okay.
Right.
So yeah. Now, one thing this will do is leave a trail of temporary directories. And that may be okay, because what happens is you can go and check these things, and you might even say logging info, import logging, say logging.info created scratch file, scratch test directory, excuse me. Like that. Okay. That way, when you run the test, you'll see this output. And if you see something that just doesn't make any sense, you can literally go navigate into this. You know, because without this, we don't know what the path to this is. Right.
Right. Okay.
So now if we need to look in this directory for whatever reason, we can. Okay. Now, like I said, this will leave a trail of that. And depending on your operating system and how it's configured, it's pretty harmless to leave this in practice, because it'll create more temporary directories, but it's, you're putting small amounts of data each one. It's not going to take a much disk space, even if you run the test a lot. And often an operating system has some mechanism of periodically removing old temporary files. If something Unixy, this will create under /temp or whatever the equivalent is, so that there may be a process often that will clean up old temporary files. Okay. And sometimes not, but you may not care anyway, right? You could do this a million times almost before you would notice, in terms of your system performance. That said, what you could do is you could clean up if you wanted to. And I like to use something called shutil. And then it would say, I think the function name is rmdrs plural. Not certain of that. I might be misremembered, but something like that.
Okay.
Now, what this will do is recur, and there may be an option. I can't remember. There may be some option you have to pass in. So I'll looking that up in the docs is an exercise for you all. But what this will do is it will delete recursively a directory and anything in it. So this is how you would clean it up. Now, there's a couple of downsides to this. One is that if something ever happened, so let's say God help you, if in your test method you wrote this.
Oh no.
Now you're screwed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. That, obviously you would not deliberately do that, but could something happen that is equivalent and it accidentally gets in there? It's not impossible, right? When you can write defensive code, you would say assert self.scratchdir starts with like this, right? I'm assuming that this is for Unix. I think you're actually using Windows, aren't you?
I'm on
or
Mac.
what? Mac? Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So that counts as something Unixy. Yeah. Linux, Darwin, actual Unix. Yeah. Okay, so that would work, right? Well, actually, I wonder if I'm not sure where Mac OS current recent versions actually put their temporary files. But the point is, you put in some defensive code here that makes sure it's not, slash, right? Or
Okay, great.
/user/your username, right?
I've actually used shutil to remove directories, and it's never occurred to me that I might be, removing my base directory. Okay, then thank you. You've saved my life potentially.
The worst
Yeah.
instance of this kind of bug that I'm aware of was probably like 10 or 15 years ago with the Steam client. Does anyone happen to remember this? So
No.
there's Steam, which is a gaming platform client, etc. Kitchen sink, Swiss Army chainsaw for gaming. And years ago, they had something where it was actually a bash bug that in a cleanup actually failed to quote a variable, which changes the semantics of how that resolves into a path in bash. You can, if you search for Steam bash bug, then probably it'll be, the first result. And then that was basically spiritually equivalent to this bug. Okay. Now something else. And by the way, Tom, I saw your hand up a second ago. Sorry, I'll come back to you in a moment when I finish this line of lecturing here. Okay, so that's one thing. Now another thing is, what I've written this, and I'm actually notice that it's not what happens if the test fails in a way that makes zero sense to me. I'm scratching my head. I'm like, I need to look in the directory. But, teardown executes even if the test method fails. So what happens? Well, in practice, what you can do is you can just comment it out. It's one line. Here we have another line in the method, so we can just comment it out. What I've done, if you can actually do things where you say check if an environment is variable set, and if not, then do not delete. You can get really fancy with it, right? But basically you can temporal, that's something it'll clean up. And then so I would strongly suggest you put in some defensive assertion like this if you're going to do this. And really the safest thing is not to do it at all. And in practice, it'd be very unusual for you to run this test enough times on your local machine that would cause a problem. So
Great.
Yeah. So any questions or comments? So I know Tom had one, but he's had to step away for a second. Yeah, Tom. Yeah, he was saying, I'm going to suggest that. Okay. All right. So Alfonso, any other comments or questions about what we've done so far here?
No, great. That answers my question. I wasn't sure how to do this, and the just having test files makes it easier. I was thinking, do I have to mock this? Is there a way to mock these file objects? Should I even be? This is so much easier. Okay, I just wasn't. A lot of what you were saying about the purest view of what's a unit test versus what's an integration test. I was kind of jamming myself up with that, but this is the practical solution.
It's an artificial distinction. It's it's a useful distinction at times, and it's possible to use it to make your life harder than it needs to be. So
sure.
A lot of times you just don't. It's just an automated test, right?
Right.
You probably noticed that in the course material, I use the phrase automated test a lot. Right. There probably some of you have. I do. And whereas people talk about unit tests, and I just use the phrase automated test, even though not many people besides me speak or write the phrase automated test a lot. I do that because I think it's useful to have that level of distinction that is inclusive of all kinds of, unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests, and every other form of code test that you can conceive of. Right. So that's often when I'm thinking in terms of that concept of automated tests, that's deliberately deleting the distinction between unit tests and integration tests, because it's just not useful to have that distinction in the context in which I'm thinking about it there, right? Sometimes it's a useful distinction, sometimes it's not.
Okay.
So it's just different tools in the toolbox. So. So Tom, I saw your comment. Did you have anything else to add? You were just going to point out the teardown thing, right, Tom? Or did you have another comment?
Yeah, just a teardown.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that. All right. Anybody else have any questions or comments about this? What we talked about so far? And by the way, Alfonso, do you want to stop here? Or if you want, I'm happy to keep going. I have some time today. It's up to you. Because we can also talk about this later too. We can also do another day where we talk about, more. You can take what we've learned, or what we've covered rather, and what you've learned, implement it, and then we can look at this code base again and base it on where it is at that point if you want.
Sure. Yeah, that would be great. I think I have a lot to go off of here, and I can start implementing some of this, and I can report my progress, and maybe over the course of my presentations next week. I have it working. The presentation works. I just want the code to look nice now. So,
Yeah.
So, okay, great. I can come back next time. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alfonso. Thanks for great work on this project, and thanks for being, sharing it with us so we can all learn by looking at it.